Part 2 Assessment Task 3, you will notice a slight variation. When we get to question 8, it starts to talk about your case study client. And your case study client has some mental health issues. She gets bouts of depression, her sister's bipolar. There's all sorts of things going on in her life. So you're asked to discuss some of the things that relate to this case. For each of the items in question 8, like culture, environment and social groups, you're asked 2 different questions. How could this factor strengthen the way the client manages stressful events? And then how could this factor make the client more vulnerable to stressful events? An example's been provided for you. If the factor was lots of friends, how could this strengthen things for the client? Well, it gives the clients lots of people to talk to and possibly to get help from. On the other hand, how could this factor make the client more vulnerable to stressful events? The client might not want to be the odd one out with problems, so hides from her friends. So just think about what makes it strong, or possibly what makes the client more vulnerable. So you'll see a whole series of questions there in question 8 and 9. And then in question 10, it talks about signs of abuse. Obviously, we don't want to assess you having to deal with a real client who's sadly being abused. So the case study information goes through these details. So just think about those answers and think, how are people who use health and disability services vulnerable to this sort of abuse? There's one example given for you. It says type of abuse, sexual. Example, someone in a wheelchair who uses disability services might not be able to defend themselves if a person touched them in a sexual way. So for your clients, if your case study client was actually a real client, what sort of sexual abuse, what may she be vulnerable to for each of these things? So there are file notes you have to write out as if it is a real client, and there's also information about different indicators that abuse is occurring. You have to think about the power inside the relationship in this case study, and you have to think about the procedures your workplace has in place. Your case study person's called Dorothy, and you'll see there's lots and lots and lots going on in her life. You need to just go through each question and answer them with the details that you can see from the case study. And if you need some tips and techniques on recognizing the signs of abuse, go back to your online module for module 2, and there's all sorts of details there to help you. There's a handy downloadable sheet that you can also refer to. So task 3 is dealing with your case study client, and then you have one small task to complete this process.